Hey guys, Ricky Robertson here. Welcome back for another presentation by yours truly. Again, I'm Ricky Robertson from Lee Junior High. Everybody just calls me Coach Rob. Today, I'm here to talk with you about the Louisiana Purchase, a world-changing event. So let's look. You might want to get some supplies for the day, paper and a pencil. Nothing too over the top. Today's standards that we're going to be looking at, we have 8.2.5, analyze causes and effects of major events and evaluate their impact on the growth and development of Louisiana. And then our secondary standard will be to explain the importance of the Mississippi River as it relates to historical events throughout Louisiana history. I'd probably flip those and be just as productive. So these are both pretty important. So let me give you a little backstory on what we've got here going on in world history. So we've got this continent of North America, and it's kind of sitting over by itself. And then Christopher Columbus sets out in 1492 and establishes for Spain over down in Cuba. And then a little while later, the French come in. They're actually a little further north here. They come in and establish themselves as fur traders in Canada. And then later on in the 1600s, 1607, the British, correction, I'm sorry, I left out St. Augustine. St. Augustine, the Spanish come in I look back at my notes, 1565 in Florida. The first settlement in what would become the United States of America, St. Augustine, Florida. Then the British come over and they set up in Jamestown in Virginia. Click again. There we go. So here we are, this relatively new plot of land. You've got three of the world's major powers duking it out for pieces of North America to spread their empires. And so, as time went on, Spain would move up the west coast of North America. Another ship would come over, and France would establish down here in what is now Haiti. They'd settle this territory and call it Saint Domingue. And then in 1782, La Salle comes down the Mississippi River, reaches the mouth of the Mississippi River at the Gulf of Mexico, and then establishes that this river that he called the Colbert, which was the Mississippi River, and everything that drained into it and the land that surrounded, he would claim those areas for France. But the Treaty of Fontainebleau in 1762 would give the land that was Louisiana to the west of the Mississippi River to Spain, and then all of Canada and what was east of the Mississippi River to Great Britain. And in 1776, this guy is a representation of Thomas Jefferson. He and some of his buddies, including a guy named Robert Livingston, would get frustrated with British rule and decided to break away. And so these rebels said, we'll start our own country, we don't need you. And out went the Great Britain in America, and we started our own country. 13 stars, 13 colonies. Oh, let me back up, because that's a pretty important piece right there. So in 1791, you remember the French had Haiti. What is now Haiti was Saint Domingue, but they had a big slave revolt down in their wealthy colony. It said that Saint Domingue, which is now known as Haiti, was the richest colony in the French Empire, and some believe it was the wealthiest empire, or was the wealthiest colony in the world. At the time, it was estimated that that one colony, the country that we now call Haiti, produced 40% of the sugar that was shipped into Europe, as well as 60% of the coffee. So a lot of the goods that were used in Europe at the time were coming from that one colony in the Caribbean. 1791, that slave revolt broke out. It would become the Haitian Revolution, where they would declare their independence from France later on. 1799, this guy takes power in France. He had been an important part of the French army. We're not going to get into that today, but Napoleon Bonaparte would become the emperor and king of France, or emperor, important guy there. Keep him in the back of your mind. So that leads us to Spain ceding their part of Louisiana back to France in 1801. So that leads us to today. Well, today, in that we're talking about this, but in the time of our presentation here, it's going to be in the early 1800s, 1802. You got Thomas Jefferson, you got Napoleon, French in the middle of the country, the United States on the East Coast. They're looking to move over a little bit into further west. As you may recall, they're looking for westward expansion. They want to move from the East Coast and they want to go west. But Thomas Jefferson is a little concerned that France just got the Louisiana territory back from Spain. He's worried that with France having control of that territory and the port of New Orleans, and it could be a difficult task to get goods out and move the military if needed. So Thomas Jefferson sends a letter. As you may recall, he and his buddy Robert Livingston got upset and they wrote the Declaration of Independence to break away from Great Britain. Well, 1802, Robert Livingston is serving as Thomas Jefferson's minister to France. Thomas Jefferson at the time was the third president of the U.S. So Thomas Jefferson sends a letter, 4-page letter, to Robert Livingston in France. This is a copy of that 4-page letter. Which leads us to our task for the day, which is this soapstone. It's a mnemonic device so you can use the first letter to come up with these answers. So this is an excerpt of Thomas Jefferson's letter to Robert Livingston. I'll read through it quickly so we can work on our soapstone. So it says, letter from Thomas Jefferson to Robert Livingston, April 18th, 1802. The cession of Louisiana and the Floridas by Spain to France works most sorely on the U.S. On this subject, the Secretary of State has written to you fully. There is on the globe one single spot, the possessor of which is our natural and habitual enemy. It is New Orleans, through which the produce of 3/8 of our territory must pass to market, and from its fertility it will long yield more than half of our whole produce and contain more than half our inhabitants. France, placing herself in that door, assumes to us the attitude of defiance. Spain might have retained it quietly for years. Her pacific dispositions, her feeble state, would induce her to increase our facilities there, so that her possession of the place would be hardly felt by us, and it would not perhaps be very long before some circumstance might arise which might make the cession of it to us the price of something of more worth to her. Not so can it ever be in the hands of France. It is impossible that France and the U.S. can continue to be friends when they meet in so irritable a position. The day that France takes possession of New Orleans, it seals the union of two nations who in conjunction can maintain exclusive possession of the ocean. From that moment, we must marry ourselves to the British fleet and nation. We must turn all our attentions to a maritime force for which our resources place us on very high ground, and having formed and cemented together a power which may render reinforcement of our settlements here impossible to France. This is not a state of things we seek or desire. If France considers Louisiana, however, as indispensable for her views, she might perhaps be willing to look about for arrangements which might reconcile it to our interests. If anything could do this, it would be the ceding to us the island of New Orleans and the Floridas. This would certainly, in a great degree, remove the causes of jarring and irritation between us, and perhaps for such a length of time as might produce other means of making the measure permanently conciliatory to our interests and friendships. It would at any rate relieve us from the necessity of taking immediate measures for countervailing such an operation by arrangements in another quarter. I have no doubt that you have urged these considerations on every proper occasion but the government where you are, which was in France. Perhaps nothing since the Revolutionary War has produced more uneasy sensations through the body of the nation than France taking over Louisiana. Notwithstanding temporary bickerings have taken place with France, she, speaking of France, has still a strong hold on the affections of our citizens generally. I have thought it not amiss, by way of supplement to the letters of the Secretary of State, to write you this private one to impress with you the importance we affix to this transaction. Signed, Thomas Jefferson. Wow. Again, it takes about 8 weeks to get a letter from the United States across the Atlantic Ocean. So, I mean, this must be pretty important if he sent it and it took 8 weeks to get there. Our first question in the soapstone, first of all, soapstone stands for speaker, occasion, audience, purpose, subject, and tone. Hence the name of this activity, soapstone. So the first question is, who is the speaker? Who is the speaker in this letter? Well, yeah, at the top it tells us, letter from Thomas Jefferson. So Thomas Jefferson at the time was the President of the United States. He was a founding father. So he feels it is important to gain Louisiana for America to trade with the world. As he says, I mean, 3/8 of their territory, 3/8 of the United States, whatever they make has to go down the Mississippi River and out of New Orleans. What is the occasion? What is the time and place of the text? What caused this text to be written? France had regained Louisiana from Spain. The Treaty of Fontainebleau gave, is that right? Yeah. Treaty of Fontainebleau gave the area to Spain, but later France would get it back. So France regained Louisiana from Spain, and Jefferson wants Livingston to try to convince France to sell New Orleans and Florida to America. He only wants his New Orleans. That's the main thing that he wants. To whom is this? This is our evidence. And then, to whom is this text addressed? Well, again, in the title it says, to Robert Livingston. Robert Livingston is the minister of France. So I skipped ahead. What is the purpose? What did the author want the audience to think or do as a result of the purpose of writing this letter is to show concern for France taking over Louisiana. So he wants to express to Robert Livingston that the cession of Louisiana and the Floridas by Spain to France works most sorely on the U.S. He's telling Robert Livingston, this is a bad place for us. What is the message? There you go. Evidence from the letter to explain it. The cession of Louisiana and the Floridas works most sorely on the U.S. So what is the subject? The subject of the letter is his concern that France controls Louisiana and his hope that Livingston can acquire New Orleans for that economic purpose. And again, I've circled this. There is on the globe one single spot, the possessor of which is our natural and habitual enemy. It is New Orleans. Next we have, what is the author's tone? Now, I read that to you guys rather quickly. I tried to use a little bit of tone there, but my tone probably wasn't what Thomas Jefferson was like. But his tone in this letter is one of concern and fear. He is concerned that France, if they keep the port of New Orleans, that it's going to be a hindrance to the future of the United States of America. And he says that at the bottom, just how important it was to him. So, what Thomas Jefferson wanted. Thomas Jefferson wanted New Orleans. He wanted the port of New Orleans. And he was willing to pay about $3 million for it. And he would get access to New Orleans, the Mississippi River, and be able to get the products out. What Thomas Jefferson ended up getting, skipping ahead through a lot of this, but what Thomas Jefferson would end up getting was the entire Louisiana territory. And you can see it on this map. It's the area with the three stripes of the French flag. The area west of the Mississippi River. The amount that he would end up paying for it was $15 million. $11.25 million of that was in cash, and then another $3.75 million was in debt that they wrote off that France had with America. What he got access to was New Orleans, the Mississippi River, and 827,000 square miles of land. This transaction alone nearly doubled the size of the United States. It would really, literally and figuratively, put America on the map, on the world map. It was a world-changing event when Thomas Jefferson had this take place. So on this map, the United States now extended from the Atlantic Ocean to almost to the Rocky Mountains, I guess. And if you think about it, all that he wanted initially was one little dot on the map. All he wanted was New Orleans, but instead got 827,000 square miles. And just so you guys can see, that's about what Louisiana looks like today. And then New Orleans is about in that area. So it's a pretty amazing deal. And America would go on to fight for that land down the road, which you'll learn more about later. But as you can see, the Louisiana Purchase was indeed a world-changing event. So thanks for tuning in today. Again, if you have any questions, you can email me, richard.robertson@mcschools.net. Have a great day, guys. We'll see you later.